So in this video I am going to talk about history of finance, major contributor in finance who were awarded Nobel Prize for their contribution in finance theory. I'll briefly talk about Harry Markowitz, father of modern portfolio theory, William Sharpe, who developed the capital asset pricing model, Eugene Fama, who is the father of modern finance, Robert Shiller, Merton Miller, Franco Modigliani, Robert Merton, Myron Scholes, George Akerlof, Richard Taylor, Daniel Kahneman, Stephen Ross, Fisher Black, and John Leitner. So I'll start with the Harry Markowitz. It was kind of surprising that before 1952 there was no formal definition of risk or classification of risk. There was no standard model to estimate the expected return. From this, you can guess how young the finance discipline is. In 1952, Markowitz was a PhD student at the University of Chicago. So one day he went to meet his supervisor. His name was Jacob Marshak. He was waiting at the hallway and there was another guy waiting to meet his supervisor. It turned out later that that guy was a stockbroker. The guy asked Markowitz on what topic he is working on for the PhD thesis. And Markowitz said he didn't choose the topic yet. The guy asked him, "Why don't you work on the stock market? I give you a problem. Suppose you know the average return of risky asset, their variance and correlation. How would you allocate the money in different risky assets?" Markowitz liked the idea and he started working on that idea, and he found that when you combine assets in a portfolio, total risk is less than the sum of individual risk due to correlation or covariance. He for the first time classified the risk in two parts: covariance, which is systematic risk, and variance, which is unsystematic risk. He found that when you combine too many assets in a portfolio, variance part goes away, but the covariance part remains, which are known as systematic risk, or someone calls it market risk. He used the optimization technique for optimal portfolio allocation of risky assets. After he was done with the work and he submitted the PhD thesis, Milton Friedman was selected to be his PhD thesis defense committee chairman. And Friedman looked at his thesis and said, "Your math is okay, but we cannot award you the PhD because it is not purely mathematics. So we cannot award PhD in math. It is not purely economics, so we cannot award PhD in economics. It is not business either." And Markowitz's supervisor, who was sitting behind, he was saying it is not psychology either. Eventually, Markowitz was awarded PhD in economics for his work in portfolio theory. His mean variance portfolio optimization model that Markowitz invented is the first theory of finance. Many subsequent finance theory was based on his portfolio theory and his definition and classification of risk. I think if someone asks you who is the mother of finance, you might safely say this guy is the mother of finance. I'll tell you later about the father of finance. William Sharpe. This guy developed the capital asset pricing model, one of the finest inventions of finance. He started his bachelor at the UC Berkeley in medicine, and then after some time he changed his mind and he started studying accounting at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. After some time he didn't like the accounting, so he decided to study economics instead. At that time there was no field of finance at the university level. After graduation he started working at Rand Corporation, and there he met with Markowitz. He then started PhD at the UCLA and asked Markowitz about the PhD thesis idea, and Markowitz shared his work on portfolio theory of risky asset. He reviewed the Markowitz portfolio theory and found that Markowitz considered only risky asset in the optimal portfolio allocation. He argued that in the real world there are both risky asset and risk-free asset, and he combined the risky asset and risk-free asset to construct the optimal portfolio. And the result became the capital asset pricing model, or CAPM, one of the finest invention of finance as of today. And then he submitted his paper describing CAPM to the Journal of Finance in 1962. And guess what? Paper was rejected. And he waited for 2 years until another new editor came and decided to publish his paper. Now I'll be talking about Eugene Fama. He is a professor of finance at the University of Chicago. He has been teaching since 1960 at the University of Chicago. He is often regarded as the father of modern finance. He developed the efficient market hypothesis. He developed the Fama-French 3-factor model, 4-factor model, 5-factor model, and so many theories. He did his PhD in economics at the University of Chicago. After his PhD, he joined Chicago and went to meet Merton Miller, who was his PhD supervisor. And Miller asked him to teach finance, the very first course on finance theory at the Chicago. He told Miller he never took finance courses in his student life and what he should teach. And Miller told him that is why we hired you. You have to figure it out. Before 1960, it is kind of surprising that there was no central repository of stock market data, such as stock price, stock return, dividend, split, and other information. If someone wanted to know what is the past stock market return, it was not just possible because there was no data. In 1960, Ford Foundation gave a big grant to the University of Chicago to systematically collect and organize all the stock price data and to set up a research center. They call it Center for Research in Stock Price, or CRISP. Eugene Fama was given the charge of CRISP. CRISP for the first time started collecting all the historical stock market data all the way back from 1920s. There was hundreds of research papers published on the CRISP stock price data. Fama reviewed all the paper and backtested all the data if there is any strategy or any algorithm to outperform the market, and he found that no strategy can consistently outperform the market. Finally, in 1969, Fama published a paper on efficient market hypothesis based on all the article and all the data and research centers data. Efficient market hypothesis basically says that market price incorporates all the available public information, and market is so efficient that no one can consistently beat the market. Efficient market hypothesis at that time was taken as a bombshell by the market because there was a $1 billion investment industry, and if the efficient market hypothesis is right, there is no point to pay the investment advisor fee who cannot earn more return than the market. In 1992, Eugene Fama with his student Kenneth Franco published a paper on 3-factor model, or popularly known as Fama-Franco 3-factor model, the most cited paper in finance literature in the last 20 years. It basically says CAPM doesn't work well in the real market. Return not only depends on the beta or systematic risk, it also depends on other risk factors, size factor and value factor. So you can think of return as a function of 3 factors: systematic risk, size, and value. He is also regarded as the father of event study in the finance literature. This guy has contributed so much in the finance that he is often regarded as the father of modern finance. Now you know who is the father of finance and who is the mother of finance. Robert Shiller, he was given Nobel Prize for his contribution in behavioral finance, for his development of Case-Shiller index and CAPE ratio. He is now a professor of finance at the Yale University. He did his PhD in economics at the MIT. He challenged the efficient market hypothesis and empirically proved that volatility or uncertainty of the stock market was greater than that could be plausibly explained by the rational view of the future. He published a paper in 1981 that challenges the efficient market hypothesis, and that paper was one of the most cited papers in the last 100 years or so in the finance literature. He also developed the Case-Shiller index that provides information about trend in house prices all the way back from 1890s. He developed CAPM ratio, cyclically adjusted price earning ratio that can check the bubble and bust in the stock market. He successfully predicted the dot-com bubble of 1990, house market bubble of 2007 and 8. In the recent time before the coronavirus hit the market, there was a speculation that the stock market is overpriced and there is a bubble, and he predicted that market will collapse soon, even there was no coronavirus. Merton Miller. This guy did his PhD at the Johns Hopkins University, and then he joined the University of Chicago. He, along with the Franco Modigliani, proposed the capital structure theory. This capital structure theory basically says that capital structure, which is a mix of debt and equity, doesn't affect the value of the firm. They empirically showed that in the absence of tax, agency cost, and financial distress, capital structure doesn't affect the value of the firm. In the presence of tax, firm value increases by the tax shield amount. In the presence of other friction like tax, financial distress, firm have to find a optimal capital structure that will maximize the value of the firm. Franco Modigliani, he was awarded Nobel Prize for his work on capital structure theory and life cycle hypothesis. He was a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His PhD supervisor was Jacob Marshak, the same supervisor of Harry Markowitz. So he developed the idea of capital structure theory, which I have talked about, and life cycle hypothesis. So in the life cycle hypothesis, it is proposed that consumer or people aim for a stable amount of consumption throughout their life. For example, people save during their working year and spend that saving during their retirement. Robert Merton, he was awarded Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work on option pricing model. He did his PhD at MIT under Paul Samuelson, and then Samuelson hired him as a faculty at the MIT. Before Merton joined the MIT, Black and Scholes already invented the option pricing model. However, that model relied on so many restrictions and assumptions. As Merton was having mathematical background, so he used his mathematical background to generalize the formula by relaxing certain restriction and assumption set by the Black and Scholes. Later, that option pricing model named as Black-Sholes-Merton model, and two of them were awarded Nobel Prize. Only Scholes and Merton. However, Fisher-Black, who was also the contributor, was not awarded Nobel Prize. I will explain why. Myron Scholes, he did his PhD in Chicago. His PhD supervisor was none other than the Eugene Fama. After his PhD, he joined MIT. He, along with the Fisher, Black, and Robert Merton, developed the option pricing model known as Black-Sholes-Merton option pricing model. I have already talked about this. Myron Scholes, he was awarded Nobel Prize for his contribution in the development of option pricing and asset pricing model. He did his PhD in Chicago. His PhD supervisor was none other than Eugene Fama. After his PhD, he joined MIT. He, along with Fisher, Black, and Robert Merton, developed the option pricing model. known as Black-Sholes-Merton option pricing model. I have already talked about this. George Akerlof. He was awarded Nobel Prize for his work on the market for lemon and asymmetric information. He is a professor at the UC Berkeley. He studied market of asymmetric information. This is a market where seller of a product have more information than the buyer of the product. For example, suppose in a car market, there are two types of car, bad car and good car. Bad car cost $10 and good car cost $20. If buyer cannot distinguish between good and bad car and seller doesn't disclose the information about the car, buyer is going to offer an average price 15. As a result, at 15 price, bad car is going to be fetching higher price and good car is going to fetch lower price. Eventually, seller with the good product will leave the market and market will be flooded with bad seller due to asymmetric information. George Akerlof. This guy was awarded Nobel Prize for his work on market for lemon and asymmetric information. Right now he is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He studied market of asymmetric information. This is a market where seller of a product have more information than the buyer about the product quality. For example, suppose in a car market, there are two types of car, bad car and good car. Suppose that bad car cost $10 and good car cost $20. If buyer cannot distinguish between bad and good and seller doesn't disclose the true information, then guess what is going to happen? Buyer is going to offer an average price 15. As a result, bad product is getting higher price and good product is getting lower price. Eventually, seller with the good product will leave the market and market will be flooded with bad seller due to asymmetric information. Richard Thaler. He was awarded Nobel Prize for his contribution in the behavioral finance. This guy right now is a professor at the University of Chicago. He was awarded Nobel Prize for his contribution to behavioral finance in the area of behavioral bias such as limited rationality and mental accounting. Usually, traditional finance say people make decisions rationally, which means people collect all the information, analyze all the alternatives, and choose the best alternatives. But Thaler argues that in the real world, this is not true. In the real world, when people make choices, they might not have access to all the information, or they might lack in time, or they might not have the perfect ability to assess all the alternatives. In other words, in the real world, rationality is limited by different constraints such as incomplete or imperfect information, limited time, and restricted computational ability. So in the real world, how do people make the decision? People make decision based on limited rationality. He also argues that people suffer from different kind of bias, such as mental accounting. Mental accounting refers to the different value that people place on money based on many subjective criteria. For example, when a person gets money, let's say 10,000 as salary, 10,000 as bonus, he might spend bonus more lavishly than the salary, although both money have the same value. Daniel Kahneman. He was awarded Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work in applying the psychological insight in economic theory, particularly in the area of judgment and decision making under uncertainty. He showed that economic decision is influenced how choice is framed. For example, when an investor is given a choice with 60% of profit, he might select the option. When he is given the same option with 40% of loss, he might reject the option. He also introduced the idea of prospect theory. He showed that people shows disposition effect in their decision, which is the tendency of investor to sell assets that have increased in value while keeping the assets that have dropped in value. For example, consider you have two stocks. One increased by 10% one decreased by 10%. And if you have to sell one stock, most likely you are going to sell the one that have gained value, despite the fact that it might gain further, and the one that lost might decrease further. Stephen Ross, he was a professor at the MIT. This guy has so many contributions in finance. He developed the arbitrage pricing model, risk neutral option pricing, binomial option pricing, and so many concepts. But he was not awarded Nobel Prize. Although Nobel Committee has explicitly recognized his contribution, because of one fault, he was not awarded Nobel Prize. Guess what? Because he died. Fisher Black, this guy was one of the contributors in developing the Black-Sholes-Merton option pricing model. You can see the name, Black, Fisher Black. He developed the idea, but he was not given the Nobel Prize, although the other two guys got the prize. What was his fault? He died. John Lichtner, this guy developed the idea of capital asset pricing model, although another guy, Sharpe, who developed the idea separately and got the Nobel Prize, he didn't get the Nobel Prize because of one fault, because he died.